Hello, everyone. Today we are going to discuss the lesson The Rattrap by Selma Lagerlöf. Before we proceed, let's know a little more about the writer. Selma Ottilva Lovisa Lagerlöf, a Swedish novelist and poet, was born on 20th November 1858 and died on March 16, 1940. She was an author and a teacher. She published her first novel, Gosta Bowling's Saga, uh, at the age of 33. And it is very interesting. She was the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in Literature, which she was awarded in 1909. Additionally, she was the first woman to be granted a membership in the Swedish Academy in the year 1914. With this information, let's proceed to the lesson, The Rat Trap. The Rat Trap is a story of a peddler, a tramp, a vagabond, a wanderer, a poor man who finds it very difficult to live on because he doesn't have a fixed livelihood. Right? So, though the story appears to be very simple about the life of a vagabond or a tramp or a wanderer, it strikes a very deeper philosophical understanding about life. All right? So, the story looks very entertaining at times. At the same time, it is very thought provoking and philosophical. There's metaphor used, as is in the title, Rat Trap, to highlight the human weaknesses of avarice and temptation. The changing philosophy of life and its in depth dimensions in various human weaknesses and circumstances are presented very provokingly, coated with subtle humor in this story. The theme of the story is about the weaknesses of human temptation out of greed and how he falls prey to his temptation, get into troubles in life, and how he longs for redemption, escape from his mistake. It also presents the human tendency of justification of his own follies and foibles for personal benefits and how he finally accepts his mistakes into realization and penance. The idea of sin, penance, and redemption. This process is explained very dramatically in the story. Together, the story stirs the complacency of the rich, the haves, against the poor and forces the former to think into the pathetic lives of the poor people and the destitutes. In all the atrocities, it is the ray of hope that and the inexplicable act of kindness by good souls keep the belief in the essential goodness of human that makes us go on. All right, so whenever we are undergoing any type of sufferings or kind of harrowing experiences, it is the belief in some the essential worth of human beings, their human kindness, which makes us go on. Now let's think about the message of the story. The story Rat Trap brings home the idea that the hidden ray of human goodness is inherent in every one of us. However, one appears to be very evilish, sinful, arrogant, or terrible. It can be ignited. That essential human kindness or human nature can be ignited to radiate into a great radiant light in the life of others through love and compassion. None of us is beyond the human errors, and none can insulate himself or herself away from the mistake and can judge upon others' mistakes. It's impossible. Each one will be prey to the temptation and commit mistakes out of our weak moment of greed and needs. This is what we can see in the story as well. The peddler, the tramp, the vagabond. Our uncontrollable greed and temptations force us to touch the bite, and get trapped in our life forever. Let's think about the title. The title Rattrap is very apt in the sense that here a Rattrap seller gets trapped into follies when his poverty tempted him to steal the crofter's money. Using the powerful metaphor of a rat trap, the author brings forth such weak human predicament of temptation and the desire for redemption. Similar to a rat is tempted by a bait and it gets trapped, we human beings also are prone to be attracted by the baits of avarice and gets into traps out of our mistakes. Okay, yeah, this is just to satisfy our uncontrollable greed following the temptations. So, we can see that the story is written in a fairy tale manner, beautifully decked with a subtle humor, striking the philosophy of life in various dimensions. Now, let's have a look at the characters. The main character is a peddler, otherwise called the tramp, otherwise called the vagabond. Here he is selling rat trap. A poor fellow he finds very difficult to make both ends meet. Sometimes he sells rat traps made out of thrown away wires from shops. Sometimes he does steal petty things from different places. Petty thievery. That way he lives on. And he always has an aversion or a kind of a ill feeling against rich people, and he thinks that it is because of them that he is poor. They are very uncompassionate, they are very much indifferent towards the poor people, so he always feels ill about the rich people. Okay, and we have a crofter here. A crofter, normally a crofter is called a farmer in Scotland. So a poor farmer. Okay, he is living in a small cottage. All right. So then we have a blacksmith who is working in the Ramslow Ironworks factory in the forest. In the factory, you will see the blacksmith. Okay, ironworks factory, and you will have the owner of the factory, ironmaster, and then his compassionate daughter, Edla Wilmanson. So these are the characters of the story. All right. So the underlying theme is that the essential human worth of kindness can be stirred in any human beings by love and compassion. So that is what the theme of the story. So let's listen to the story, The Rat Trap by Selma Lagerlof. Once upon a time, there was a man who went around selling small rat traps of wire. He made them himself at odd moments, from the material he got by begging in the stores or at the big farms. But even so, the business was not especially profitable. So he had to resort to both begging and petty thievery to keep body and soul together. Even so, his clothes were in rags, his cheeks were sunken, and hunger gleamed in his eyes. No one can imagine how sad and monotonous life can appear to such a vagabond who plods along the road left to his own meditations. But one day this man had fallen into a line of thought which really seemed to him entertaining. He had naturally been thinking of the rat traps when he was struck by the idea that the whole world about him, the whole world with its lands and seas, its riches and villages, its cities, was nothing but a big rat trap. It had never existed for any other purpose than to set baits for people. It offered riches and joys, shelter and food, heat and clothing, exactly as a rat trap offered cheese and pork, and as soon as anyone let himself be tempted to touch the bait, it closed in on him, and then everything came to an end. The world had, of course, never been very kind to him, so it gave him unwonted joy to think ill of it in its way. It became a cherished pastime of his, during many dreary ploddings, to think of people he knew who had let themselves be caught in the dangerous snare, and of others who were still circling round the bait. One dark evening, as he was trudging along the road, he caught sight of a little grey cottage by the roadside, and he knocked on the door to ask shelter for the night. Nor was he refused. Instead of sour faces which ordinarily met him, the owner, who was an old man without wife or child, was happy to get someone to talk to in his loneliness. Immediately he put the porridge pot on the fire and gave him supper. Then he carved off such a big slice from his tobacco roll, and it was enough both for the stranger's pipe and his own. Finally he got out an old pack of cards and played jollies with his guest until bedtime. The old man was just as generous with his confidences as with his porridge and tobacco. The guest was informed at once that in his days of prosperity his host had been a crofter at Ramsjo Ironworks factory and had worked on the land. Now that he was no longer able to do any labor, it was his cow which supported him. Yes, that Bossy was extraordinary. She could give milk for the creamery every day, and last month he had received all of 30 kroner notes in payment. The stranger must have seemed incredulous, for the old man got up and went to the window, took down a leather pouch which hung on the nail in a very window frame, and picked out 3 wrinkled 10 kroner bills. These he held up before the eyes of his guest, nodding knowingly, and then stuffed them back into the pouch. The next day, both men got up in good season. The crofter was in a hurry to milk the cow, and the other man probably thought he should not stay in bed when the head of the house has gotten up. They left the cottage at the same time. The crofter locked the door and put the key in his pocket. The man with the Rattrap said goodbye and thank you, and whereupon each went his own way. But half an hour later, the Rattrap peddler stood again before the door of the crofter's house. He didn't try to get in, however. He only went up to the window, smashed the pane, stuck in his hand, and got hold of the pouch with the 30 kroner. He took the money and thrust it in his own pocket. Then he hung the leather pouch very carefully back in its place and went away. As he walked along with the money in his pocket, he felt quite pleased with his smartness. He realized, of course, that at first he dared not continue on the public highway, but must turn off the road into the woods. During the first hours, this caused him no difficulty. Later in the day it became worse, for it was a big and confusing forest which he had gotten into. He tried to be sure to walk in a definite direction, but the paths twisted back and forth so strangely. He walked and walked without coming to the end of the wood, and finally he realized that he had only been walking around the same part of the forest. All at once he recalled his thoughts about the world as a rat trap. Now his own turn had come. He had let himself be fooled by the bait and the branches, its thickets and fallen logs closed in upon him like an impenetrable prison from which he could never escape. He is in the rat trap of his own temptations. It was late in December. Darkness was already descending over the forest. This increased the danger and increased also his gloom and despair. Finally, he saw no way out, and he sank down on the ground, tired to death, thinking that his last moment had come. But just as he laid his head on the ground, he heard a sound, a hard, regular thumping. There was no doubt as to that it was. He raised himself. Those are the hammer strokes from the iron mill, he thought. There must be people nearby. He summoned all his strength, got up, and staggered into the direction of the sound. The Ramsjo ironworks, which are now closed down, were, not so long ago, a large plant with a smelter, rolling mill, a forge. In the summertime, long lines of heavy loaded barges and scows slid down the canal, which led to the large inland lake, and in the wintertime, the roads near the mill were black from all the coal dust which sifted down from the big charcoal crates. During one of the long dark evenings just before Christmas, the master smith and his helper sat in the dark forge workshop near the furnace, waiting for the pig iron, the impure iron which had been put in the fire, to be ready to put on the anvil to be beaten. Every now and then one of them got up to stir the glowing mass with a long iron bar, returning in a few moments dripping with perspiration, though, as was the custom, he wore nothing but a long shirt and a pair of wooden shoes. All the time there were many sounds to be heard in the forge. The big bellows groaned and the burning coal cracked. The fireboy shoveled charcoal in the mow of the furnace with a great deal of clatter. Outside roared the waterfall, and a sharp north wind whipped the rain against the brick tiled roof. It was probably on account of all this noise that the blacksmith didn't notice that a man had opened the gate and entered the forge until he stood close to the furnace. Surely it was nothing unusual for a poor vagabond without any better shelter for the night to be attracted to the forge by a glow of light which escaped through the sooty panes, and to come to warm themselves in front of the fire. The blacksmith glanced only casually and indifferently at the intruder. He looked the way people of his type usually did, with a long beard, dirty ragged, and with a bunch of rat traps dangling on his chest. He asked permission to stay, and the master's blacksmith nodded a hearty consent without honoring him with a single word. The tramp didn't say anything either. He hadn't come there to talk, but only to warm himself and sleep. In those days, Ramsjo Iron Mill was owned by a very prominent ironmaster whose greatest ambition was to ship out good iron to the market. He watched both night and day to see that the work was done as well as possible, and at every moment he came into the forge on one of his nightly rounds of inspection. That moment he was about to reach there. Naturally, the first thing he saw was a tall ragamuffin who had eased his way so close to the furnace that steam rose from the wet racks. The ironmaster didn't follow the example of the blacksmith, who had hardly designed or deigned to look at the stranger. He walked close up to him, looked him over very carefully, then tore off his slouch hat to get a better view of his face. But of course, "It is you, Niels Olof?" he said. "How do you look?" The man with the rat traps had never before seen the ironmaster at Ramsjo and didn't even know what his name was. But it occurred to him that if the fine gentleman thought he was an old acquaintance, he might perhaps throw him a couple of kroner. Therefore, the vagabond didn't want to undeceive him all at once. "Yes, God knows things have gone downhill with me," he said. "You shouldn't have resigned from the regiment," said the ironmaster. "That was a mistake. If only I had still been in the service at the time, it never would have happened. Well, now, of course, you will come home with me," the ironmaster said, "to go along up to the manor house and be received by the owner like the old regimental comrade." That, however, didn't please the tramp. "No, I couldn't think of it," he said, looking quite alarmed. He thought of the 30 kroner. To go up to the manor house would be like throwing himself voluntarily into the lion's den. He only wanted a chance to sleep here in the forge and then sneak away inconspicuously as possible the next morning. The ironmaster assumed that he felt embarrassed because of his miserable clothing. Please don't think I have such a fine home that you cannot show yourself there, the ironmaster said. Elizabeth is dead, as you may already have heard. My boys are abroad, and there is no one at home except my oldest daughter and myself. We were just saying that it was too bad we didn't have any company for Christmas. Now come along with me and help us make the Christmas food disappear a little faster. But the stranger said no, and again no, and the ironmaster saw that he must give in, he must agree. It looks as though the Captain von Staller preferred to stay with you tonight, he said to the master blacksmith and turned on his heel. But he laughed to himself as he went away, and the blacksmith, who knew him, understood very well that he hadn't said his last word. It was not more than half an hour before they heard the sound of the carriage wheels outside the forge. And a new guest came in, but this time it was not the ironmaster. He had sent his daughter, apparently hoping that she would have better powers of persuasion than he himself. She entered, followed by a valet, a servant, carrying on his arm uh, a big fur coat. She was not at all pretty, but seemed modest and quite shy. In the forge everything was just as it had been earlier in the evening. The master blacksmith and his apprentice still sat on their bench. The iron and charcoal still glowed in the furnace. The stranger had stretched himself out on the floor and lay with a piece of pig iron on his head and his hat pulled down over his eyes. As soon as the young girl caught sight of him, she went up and lifted his hat. The man was evidently used to sleeping with one eye open. He jumped up abruptly and seemed to be quite frightened. My name is Edla Wilmanson, said the young girl. My father came home and said that you wanted to sleep here in the forge tonight, and then I asked permission to come and bring you home to us. I'm sorry, Captain, that you are having such a hard time. She looked at him compassionately with her heavy eyes, and then she noticed that the man was afraid. Either he has stolen something or else he has escaped from jail, she thought, and added quickly, You may be sure, Captain, that you will be allowed to leave us just as freely as you came, only please stay with us over Christmas Eve. She said this in such a friendly manner that the Rattrap peddler must have felt confidence in her. It would never have occurred to me that you would bother with me yourself, miss, he said. I'll come at once. He accepted the fur coat which the valet handed him with a deep bow, threw it over his racks, and followed the young lady out to the carriage without granting the astonished blacksmith so much as a glance. But while he was riding up to the manor house, he had evil forebodings, evil warnings and signs. He was afraid. Why the devil did I take that fellow's money? He thought. Now I am sitting in the rat trap and will never get out of it. The next day was Christmas Eve, and when the ironmaster came to the dining room for breakfast, he probably thought with satisfaction of his old regimental comrade whom he had run across so unexpectedly. First of all, we must see to it that he gets a little flesh on his bones, he said to his daughter, who was busy at the table. And then we must see that he gets something else to do than to run around the country selling rat traps. It is queer that things have gone downhill with him as badly as that, said the daughter. Last night I didn't think there was anything about him to show that he had once been an educated man. You must have patience, my little girl, said the father. As soon as he gets clean and dressed up, you will see something different. Last night he was naturally embarrassed. The tramp manners will fall away from him with the tramp clothes. Just as he said this, the door opened and the stranger entered. Yes, now he was truly clean and well dressed. The valet had bathed him, cut his hair, and shaved him. Moreover, he was dressed in a good-looking suit of clothes which belonged to the ironmaster. He wore a white shirt and a starched collar and whole shoes. But although his guest was now so well groomed, the ironmaster didn't seem pleased. He looked at him with a puckered brow, doubtful, and it was easy to understand that when he had seen the strange fellow in the uncertain reflection from the furnace, he might have made a mistake. But that now, when he stood there in broad daylight, it was impossible to make a mistake of his old acquaintance. "What does this mean?" he thundered. The stranger made no attempt to dissimulate or disguise himself. He saw at once that the splendor he had got has all gone. "It is not my fault, sir," he said. "I never pretended to be anything but a poor trader, and I pleaded and begged to you to be allowed to stay in the forge. But no harm has been done so far. At first I can put on my rags again and go away." "Well," said the ironmaster, hesitating a little, "it was not quite honest either. You must admit that, and I should not be surprised yet if a sheriff would like to have something to say in this matter. He would be taking to the person who will look after the crimes and punishment of people." The tramp took a step forward and struck the table with his fist. "Now I am going to tell you, Mr. Ironmaster, how things are," he said. "The whole world is nothing but a big rat trap, and all the good things that are offered to you are nothing but cheese rinds and bits of pork set out to drag poor people into trouble. And if the sheriff comes now and locks me up for this, then you, Mr. Ironmaster, must remember that a day may come when you yourself may want to get a big piece of pork, and then you will get caught in the rat trap." The ironmaster began to laugh. "That's not so badly said, my good fellow. Perhaps we should let the sheriff alone on Christmas Eve. But now get out of here as fast as you can." But just as the man was opening the door, the daughter said, "I think he ought to stay with us today. I don't want him go." And with that she went and closed the door. "What in this world are you doing?" said the father. The daughter stood there quite embarrassed and hardly knew what to answer. That morning she had felt so happy when she thought how homelike and Christmassy she was going to make things for poor hungry wretch. She could not get away from the idea all at once, and that was why she had interceded for the vagabond. "I am thinking of this stranger here," said the young girl. "He walks and walks the whole year long, and there is probably not a single place in the whole country where he is welcome and can feel at home. Whenever he turns, he is chased away. Always he is afraid of being arrested and cross-examined. I should like to have him enjoy a day of peace with us here, just one in the whole year." The ironmaster mumbled something in his beard, and he couldn't bring himself to oppose her. "It is all a mistake, of course," she continued. "But anyway, I don't think we ought to chase away a human being whom we have asked to come here and to whom we have promised Christmas cheer." "You do preach worse than a parson," said the ironmaster. "I only hope you won't have to regret this later." The young girl took the stranger by the hand and led him to the table. "Now sit down and eat," she said, for she could see that her father had given in. The man with the rat trap said not a word. He only sat down and helped himself to the food. Time after time he looked at the young girl whom had interceded for him. Why had she done it? What could she crazy idea that be to do it? After that, Christmas Eve at Ramsdale passed just as it always had. The stranger didn't cause any trouble because he did nothing but sleep. The whole forenoon he lay on the sofa in one of the guest rooms and slept at one stretch. At noon they woke him up so that he could have his share of the good Christmas fare, but after that he slept again. It seemed as though for many years he hadn't been able to sleep as quietly and safely as here at Ramsdale. In the evening, when the Christmas tree was lighted, they woke him up again, and he stood for a while in the drawing room, blinking as though the candlelight hurt him. But after that he disappeared again. 2 hours later he was aroused once again. He then had to go down into the dining room and eat Christmas fish and porridge. As soon as they got up from the table, he went to each one present and said thank you and good night. But when he came to the young girl, she gave him to understand that it was her father's intention that the suit which he wore was to be a Christmas present. He didn't have to return it. And if he wanted to spend next Christmas Eve in a place where he could rest in peace and be sure that no evil would befall him, he would be welcomed back again. The man with the rat traps didn't answer anything to this. He only stared at the young girl in boundless amazement. The next morning, the headmaster and his daughter got up in good season to go to the early Christmas service. Their guest was still asleep and they didn't disturb him. When at about 10 o'clock they drove back from the church, the young girl sat and hung her head even more dejectedly than usual. At church, she had learned that one of the old crafters of the ironworks had been robbed by a man who went around selling rat traps. Yes, that was a fine fellow you let into the house, said the father. I only wonder how many silver spoons are left in the cupboard by this time. The wagon had hardly stopped at the front steps when the ironmaster asked the valet whether the stranger was still there. He added that he had heard at church that the man was a thief. The valet answered that the fellow had gone and that he hadn't taken anything with him at all. On the contrary, he had left behind a little package which Wilmanson was to be kind enough to accept as a Christmas present. The young girl opened the package, which was so badly done up that the contents came into view at once. She gave a little cry of joy. She found a small rat trap, and in it lay 3 wrinkled 10-kroner notes. But that was not all, and in the rat trap lay also a letter written in a large, jagged characters. The letter reads, Honored and noble Miss, since you have been so nice to me all day long, as if I was a captain, I want to be nice to you in return, as if I was a real captain. For I don't want you to be embarrassed at this Christmas season by a thief. But you can give back the money to the old man on the roadside who has a money pouch hanging on the window frame as a bait for poor wanderers. The rat trap is a Christmas present from a rat who would have been caught in the world's rat trap if he had not been raised to captain, because in that way he got power to clear himself. Written with the friendship and high regard, Captain Von Stale.